Darklings! So today I wanted to get started on doing my fairy tale coverage videos, as I promised I would do some time ago, and today I wanted to start with Russian fairy tales. So a good beginner place to start with 5 very prominent Russian folktales is this Russian fairy tales book, illustrated by Ivan Bilbin, and it's recorded by Alexander Afanasyev. My Russian is terrible, so if I mispronounce something, I apologize to any of my potentially Russian viewers. This is not very big. Amazon, $12, and it has 5 very prominent fairy tales within Russian folklore, which would be Vasilisa the Beautiful, Maria Morevna, The Feather of Finis the Falcon, The Frog Tsarevna, and Tsarevich Ivan, The Firebird and the Grey Wolf. And it's kind of funny because I recently just read these and it was kind of like a refresher, like I'd read them before, and I don't know if it's because they've become saturated in some of my research topics or they've been brought up in other reading, but it's kind of interesting to see how they've come about in modern everything else. So Vasilisa the Beautiful was something I read as a child, which has to do with a young girl named Vasilisa who had a magic doll, and it has a lot of those classic fairy tale elements such as 3 trials, evil stepmother and wicked stepsisters, and her kind of virtuous self getting herself out of trouble and having a happy ending. Maria Morevna has to do with a warrior queen and the czars of life and death, or the czar of life, Koshi, or Koshi. I don't know how to pronounce things very well, as I said. And then the scarlet flower concept of a girl who only wants a flower, and then all these different particular elements. I don't want to give any spoilers. You probably heard these, at least in pieces, and not realized it. And anyway, this is very good. However, a more popular and interesting retelling of Maria Morevna and then other bits and pieces of Russian folklore is Catherine M. Valente's Deathless, which is a very, very good book. I read it about a year ago, and it gave me lots of emotions. And it kind of modernizes it in a strange way. Very, very, very good. And if you are under the impression that Russian folklore and history is dry, this will dispel you of that notion, because this book is ridiculously good. Well, all of her work is. As for films that are based off of Russian fairy tales, I only own 3, which admittedly I guess is more than some people. But these are not necessarily all just Russian. For example, this film, which is from the 60s, is actually from the Soviet Union, Ukraine, Russia area, and it's V, or the Spirit of Evil. I believe it's from 1968, and it kind of covers the Tsar of Death, V, who is this large rock-like monster. And it's a pretty short film. It's a little more than an hour, but it's the first genuine horror film out of the Soviet Union. It's very much worth it. You can watch the whole thing on YouTube with subtitles. This is the 1975 Russian adaptation of The Little Mermaid. It has kind of an interesting, very Russian take on the story, and it's totally worth watching. It's kind of a fun one. Very family friendly. This one is also very family friendly. This is Maria the Wonderful Weaver, and if there's one thing that is very prevalent within Russian folklore, is the ability to weave. If you're able to create, that is a very powerful thing within Russian folklore. Another thing that's very, very prevalent in Russian fairy tales, and who is a very large figure within their folklore, is Baba Yaga, the witch. And she's a very powerful witch. She's considered the grandmother witch, and she's known for living in a hut on chicken legs. This pendant can be found on Etsy. I can't remember the name of the shop. I don't know if there are any left. But she lives in a hut on chicken legs, surrounded by a fence with human skulls. She rides through the night in a large mortar and pestle and sweeps up the trail behind her with a kitchen broom. She is old, she is temperamental, and she is a very large part of most Russian folk stories. So a lot of ways to either dispel her, encourage her. She comes as a good guy, she comes as a bad guy. She's very prevalent within the fairy tale scope in Russian folklore. While these are not fairy tales, they are worth noting because they are parts of Russian mythology and culture, and that would be Night Watch and its sequel Day Watch, which are actually both from the same book. I know that Night Watch has a sequel, and then I think there's Twilight or something. I don't know. I haven't read the books, but I know that these are both from the same book. They're very long. They're very high budget for Russian films, and I know that they are kind of confusing, and I have some difficulty paying attention through them because of how long they are, but they are really good and pretty action-packed, and it's very interesting. So I know my lists are always super scatterbrained, but that's kind of an introduction to Russian folktales, just from my perspective. I highly suggest going out and reading some for yourself. They're kind of interesting. I mean to do some kind of like official study on them instead of just reading some of the fairy tales. I'd like to properly know their cultural impact and everything. This is just extrapolating. So, anyway, that's my introduction. Take it or leave it. Till next time, Darklings.